occurrences over the past few weeks. But Baruch Hashem. Yeah. It's past us, as they say. We don't want to think about it. Okay, what we will be doing tonight is we're going to go through the subject that we're going to go through is the negative and positive influences of social surroundings. It's a subject that, that's correct. It's a subject that, we all deal with on a daily basis in our lives, and we all, I'm sure, have heard and know a lot about the subject, and it's talked a lot about in psychology and throughout society, the effect of social surroundings. The famous debate goes back all the way to Sigmund Freud. If different intuitions of individuals, dispositions, are hereditary or are environment-based. And this is, obviously, it's a combination of both. Excuse me? What did you say? I said that there's, well, let's wait till this quiet. We'll begin the class afterwards, otherwise it's too much static. Said that there is a famous debate regarding what is the main effect of an individual's personality, disposition, instinctive behavior. Is it a matter of hereditary? Is it hereditary? Is it passed on from his father? Or is it a matter of environment, effect of environment? So this sikha that we're going to study, which is featured in volume 33, is a typical Rashi sikha, quite complex initially, but
anybody will be in a position on the hard to get started. Yeah.
Should wait a few more minutes, wait till everybody's ready, and then we'll begin. So I said this sikha is a typical Rashi sikha of the Rebbe, which is known for its complex nuances of questions on Rashi. You need to have a lot of patience for them. In fact, they say that at one point the Rebbe almost gave up saying the sikhas because he saw there wasn't a crowd, there wasn't enough of an interest in these sikhas. But a few individuals who were very interested pushed the Rebbe to go ahead and continue doing so. That's what I've heard in the past. In any event, but this sikha is actually has some marvelous insights regarding the psychology of the influence of social surroundings. I think there's a lot of lessons that we can learn from it. I'll give you a little glimpse already now. This sikha is going to feature in our future volume of the Chassidus Parsha. We're putting out a volume of the Kuti Sikhas. So this is already written up. It's already there, this sikha that we're doing. So eventually you will see it in print in a book. It's in English, yes, absolutely. Okay, so I'm going to give a little introduction to the talk, and then we're going to begin Hebrew English inside the actual sikha. Parshas Bamidbar discusses the census taking of the Jewish people, right? That's the first half of the Parsha, and the order of the encampment of the tribes during the travel through the desert, right? Aside from having the census, the amount of Jews, the population, there's also the discussion of how the Jewish people would travel in the Midbar throughout what was meant to be 1 year and ended up being 40 years. But nonetheless, this is how they traveled throughout their stay in the desert. So this is the Parsha that describes the form of travel. We know it was like a square. It was actually more like a square, more like a rectangle. But nonetheless, it was. The point is that there was a specific form of how they travel, and it wasn't just chaotic. Everyone just runs for the finish line. It wasn't a spree to the finish line. It was everyone had their tribe, everyone had their area, everyone had their position, everyone had their flag, the flag of the tribe, and that's discussed in this week's parsha. On the description of the area of the encampment of the Levite family of Kahas, the Medrash and Rashi comment that Kairach, who was from the Kahas family, affected the neighboring tribe of Reuben to join the rebellion against Moshe. and eventually suffered the fatal consequences which culminated as a result. Right? So Rashi in the beginning of the Parsha, when it's discussing the positionings of the different tribes, already makes note that, by the way, Reuven was a neighbor of one of the families of the Levites called Kahas, and we know that from Kahas came out Kairach, and that had a bad influence. Kairach, who was in Kahas, who was a neighbor of Reuven, had a bad influence on his neighbor, which was the tribe of Reuven. So the Rebbe takes the task in this Sikha, the differences of wording between Rashi and the various prior sources in Medrash that record this. Now, why do I say it sounds boring? Because whenever you're involved in dikta, whenever you're involved in splitting hairs, you can literally fall asleep, and it's a big challenge to stay intellectually engaged when you're studying a subject that it sounds like you're trying to split something that's the same. Like, is the ceiling on top of my head, or is my head under the ceiling? Which one is it? Who cares, right? So this is in a lot of the Rashi sikhs, this is what the Rebbe did, and it's very wondrous, and we're going to see in a showcase example here in this sikha, that the Rebbe basically takes nuances, changes, very slight nuances that probably most people would run over and not even pay attention to. I'm not talking about people, novices, I'm talking about even Torah scholars. Would run over it. They wouldn't pay attention to the nuances of the difference. So yeah, he writes it this way, everyone writes differently. People wouldn't even think to make an issue of it. And the Rebbe makes issue with a number of different nuances of changes between Rashi and his prior sources. And he comes up with such a deep and marvelous psychological understanding and explanation of the effect of surroundings on a person. And it just, first of all, it shows how the brilliance of a Torah mind that the Rebbe had, which is something that is explained in Chalal in Torah, that there's one thing called Bekiyas, which is to have a lot of knowledge, to learn a lot of sources, to know a lot of material, to accumulate a lot of knowledge. And then there's the idea of how to understand that knowledge. And there's many different depths. And there's very few Torah scholars that are known to have the extreme depth in Torah learning that is way, way higher than the rest of the generation. The Rogatchover was an example of that, of his depth of understanding Torah. And in this Sikha, we also see the Rebbe's Rogatchover type of mind, where he splits these three different wordings of the sources into three completely different positions of understanding something so amazing as the effect of social surroundings. Now, I want to, before we begin inside, point out that we shouldn't think that, what relevance does this have to me? I live in Svastir HaKodesh, I'm surrounded by such holiness, right? We have the Marzos right here, we have the Chol Chabad Kehila, we have from Yidden, we have the Kabbalists. This is, what do we need to know about bad neighbors? We don't have bad neighbors. So, first of all, number one, I hope that's correct. I hope nobody here does have bad neighbors in any sense. If they do, then this sikha will help a little bit, hopefully. But even someone with great neighbors, we're also going to learn the positive side, the effect of good neighbors. But also, there's another aspect here to this whole talk, and that is, neighbors is not just a physical person living next door. There's many types of neighbors. There's many calibers. There's many aspects of a neighbor. The literal is, of course, the person living next door. But another type of neighbor is what you put in your head, what you listen to, what you read. What are things that you let yourself be access to? For example, a person that he's signed up to a conspiracy website, and he reads about an hour a day conspiracy news. So he has a conspiracy neighbor. That's his neighbor for all intents and purposes. It makes no difference if the person has a physical neighbor next door, or if the person is feeding his mind corrupt ideas. Whatever the case is, the person is influencing himself from a neighbor, from someone near him. Now, it goes a little deeper. When what we read, what we hear, what we listen to, the conversations we have, what we think about, all neighbors, right, isn't filtered properly, it then begins to affect the other parts of our body, which is our instinct and emotion, which is our heart. So this sikha is going to help also try to clarify a little bit of the psychology of the importance of having a very proper filtering system for what we read, for what we see, for what we listen to, for what we talk about, for what we think about. The point is that we should never think knowledge is benign. There's no such thing as benign knowledge. The moment a person enters a certain idea or knowledge into a system, they're either going to become affected from it, or they're going to go against it. But it's not going to stay parrot. It's not going to be something that's just going to stay out in there in the little box in the back of their mind as a closed present. We'll see as we go on. This is just the introduction.
There's no such thing as Parsha objective information.
I'm not saying there's no such thing as objective information. That's not. Maybe I was misunderstood. Objective information means somebody who did research into a subject, he's giving you his findings. It's objective. He doesn't care. He doesn't have a side. If I'm doing research in do flies live for 1 year or for 10 years, so I have absolutely no, I was not paid off by the fly industry to say something not true. I just did my research and gave you subjective information. But the point is that knowledge that we enter into our heads, we shouldn't be cool to think that it's not going to affect us one way or another. It's just knowledge. There's no such thing as knowledge being just knowledge. Knowledge has an effect on how we act, on what we do, on our instincts, etc.
Even the flies are waiting for this.
Okay. I will just finish off this paragraph. Much of the way we think, feel, speak, and act, this is the background, is directly influenced by the people whom we socialize with and are surrounded by. There are, however, different levels of influence that exist, which depend on prior dispositions and weakness points and strong points that the person has. This sikh is an eye-opener for all those who seek betterment of character and growth in Torah and mitzvahs to pay close attention to, with whom they associate, and the surroundings they are found in. The explanations of the sikha. The sikha will explore 4 different ideas that all my sikhas, my mug, and I try to capsulize. Obviously, there may be a lot more, but this is the 4 that I chose. Number 1. What effect did the neighboring tribes have on each other in their form of encampment? That's what we already introduced that the Parsha talks about. Number 2, why does Rashi change the wording from the source in the Medrash? Number 3, what spiritual relationship does one share with a neighbor? Again, what spiritual relationship does one share with a neighbor? And 4, what are the 3 levels of effect that a good or bad neighbor have upon us? Those are our 4 explorations, and we will now begin swimming inside the Sikha. We're going to be in the beginning. I don't have the whole Sikha in front of me. I cut and paste different parts. We're not going to have time to do the whole thing. So if you notice me skipping something, it's probably intentional. Not that, of course, it's not important, but because we have to do an abridged version with the time frame we have. Aleph. Oy the smiches degel machane reuven shachanu temana with nekahas amru chazal b'uva pirshash ater oy l'rosh v'elishvim. There was a famous Jewish statement, which is, I think it's actually a famous world proverb, which is, woe unto the wicked, woe unto his neighbor. Oy l'rasha v'oy l'shcheinah. They joke about this regarding the difference between how a chassid and an oil masher learns Gemara. Actually, the Rebbe Rayat wrote this joke in a letter that was written in reply to Rav Noah against the attacks of the Chazon Ish and his opinions. And the Rebbe Rayat wrote the following: there's an old Hasidic saying that the difference between how a chassid learns a Gemara and how a non-chassid learns it is that when the chassid learns the Gemara, if he sees something that looks wrong, he doesn't mark an X in the Tosfos or in the Gemara. He understands that he needs to work on himself. He doesn't get it yet. He hasn't yet perfected his intellectual capabilities to comprehend the Gemara. But the Eilim Ashurs, and I don't mean this as to apply today to offend any groups, this is just the way the joke goes. The Eilim Ashur, when he learns it and he sees that there's something that doesn't make sense in Tosfos, he takes a scissor and cuts it out. So his Chavrusa, the Chassidish Chavrusa, asked him, okay, I understand that you didn't like this Tosfos. What did the guy in back have wrong? There's two, Gemara has two sides. It says, Oil Rosh of So, regarding what the Torah describes in the beginning of the Parsha, that the encampment of Reuven, right, was in the south, and Kahas was in the south as well, right, one of the families of Levi. Chazal say that this, and Rashi brings it down, that this caused an influence of woe unto the Russia, which is of course going on Kairach, and woe is to the neighbor. So let's explain this a little bit. We're going to go through right now the encampments of how they were. The tribes of Yehuda, Yisachar, and Zvulun were all towards the east. They were the front, as Kedma, east, is always the front. The tribes of Reuben, Shimon, and Gad, those three were on the south. So if we're facing east, they're to our right. The tribes of Ephraim, Manasseh, and Binyamin were on the west, which is really the back, because we travel eastward, so our back is facing west. And the last three tribes of Dan, Asher, and Naphtali were in the north, which is to the left side. Now the Levite family, so that includes all the tribes except for Levi. The Levite family was split into 4 groups. Just like the tribes, 12 tribes were split into 4 groups, north, south, east, west. So too, the Levite families were split into 4, and they of course encamped in the middle, in the center, and there was a maximum of 2,000 amos distance between them and the tribes, as Rashi points out, so they can all interact and visit each other on Shabbos, so they can go to meals and join each other for Shabbos meals, so everyone's not segregated. They can't walk because it's outside of Tchum Shabbos. So there was a 2,000 maximum amma distance between the surrounding tribes and the center, which contained Levi. But Levi itself had 4 families, which 3 families plus Moshe and Aaron, which had 4 different positions. So what were the positions? So the positions were as follows. We have the Kahas family was on the south, Gershon was on the west, the Merari family was on the north, and in the east was Moshe and Aaron, okay, and their families. So it ends up based on this description that who was the neighbor of Reuven, Shimon, and Gad? It was the family, the Kahas family of the Levites. And this is what the Medrash and Rashi points out, that this is what led to a Oila Rosh of Oila Shem. So what is it referring to? So Rashi doesn't really give us here the details, but we know that's referring to the following. In the infamous revolt of Kairach and his followers, so many men of the tribe of Reuben lost their lives, according to different Pirushim, but we know that Rashi, Al-Taira, goes the 24,000 men, the 250 men were from the tribe of Reuben. It's different Pirushim, but the point is that everyone agrees Reuben got hit very, very hard by the calamities that happened after the rebellion of Kairach. Kairach desired to create a revolt against Moshe Rabbeinu, right, and Aaron, and Kairach naturally turned to his neighbors to form a coalition, which were to his right, to his south, right, the south of him, which was Reuben. And many of the tribe of Reuben joined the revolt against Moshe. And the Chachamim analyzed this by saying that there were the neighboring position of the two is what caused Reuben to get involved. And here's where we're going to now go into the 3 different sources that we're going to present. So we're back inside the text. In explanation of this statement of Chazal, woe unto the Rasha, woe unto his neighbor, we find a few different ways of how it's explained, and amongst them are as follows. The Rebbe here brings from the Medrash Tanchuma, which was written by Rebbe Tanchuma. Then he brings from the Medrash Rabbah, and then he brings from how Rashi writes it. Now, chronologically, as we know, the Medrash Tanchuma and the Medrash Rabbah preceded Rashi by at least 1,000 years. So they are obviously his prime sources that he nurtured from to write his commentary. So let's begin the first one. Tanchuma Isa umin hadarim b'nei kahas usmuchum lahem reuben l'shimon l'gad. Kan amru elu rosh v'elu shchena. Elu shlosh hashvat sheishcheim l'kayach v'adasei b'darim avdu imay b'machlakusei shenemar v'tiftach ha'atzis piyah v'tiv b'isam es b'temes kol ha'shalem es kol ha'ben ha'shem l'kayach v'es kol ha'atzis. Interesting. So the Tanchuma says that, okay, we already established the fact Kahas is a neighbor of Reuben and Shimon and Gad. What does this mean? The Medrash now adds that these three tribes, they became lost in the Machlekes, and the earth opened up its mouth, and everything became swallowed. So the Medrash Tanchuma is basically saying they got hurt, they got hit, they got smitten in this dispute that occurred with Bamidbar, the next source. Gimel shel darim shahayu lebala machlekes smuchim avdu imahem v'aleim nemar oile rasha v'eile shchena. The three tribes in the south that were near the family of Kahas, they were together with them bali machlekes, people who did the rebellion against Moshe, the dispute against Moshe, and they became lost with them, meaning the three tribes, Reuben, Shimon, and Gad, became destroyed together with, to an extent, together with Kahas, with Kairach. Since they were neighbors of Kahas, of Kairach, therefore they became Bala Machlekes. As so it says, it says in the Pasuk, in Parsha's Kairach, that Kairach ben Yitzhak took. What does it mean? He took. He influenced, he convinced his neighbors, those who were closest to him, to join the rebellion. And so too, Bnei Gad and Bnei Shimon also joined. This is very interesting because we actually don't find in Scripture that Gad and Shimon had anything to do with the Kairach rebellion. All we know about is Reuven, right? We know that Dasan, Aviram, Oin ben Pelas. We know Sheva Reuven was highly involved, but we never heard until we read this message that Gad and Shimon had anything to do with it. But here it says that they were in this machlekes as well. They weren't like all the other tribes who had some representatives for them. They were head in, just like our third source is Rashi. So let's see when Rashi had these two sources in front of him, what he did. Rashi alotayre kasav usmuchim lahem degel reuven achayim teimana oil rasha ve'elishchenai lekach lakum hen dasan avir masayim chamishim ishim kayach v'adasim shlemam melachos. Since they were neighbors, therefore, since we say woe unto him, woe unto his neighbor, therefore they also got drawn into the dispute and they were also punished together. So far, does it sound like we've been redundant, just really saying the same thing in just three different ways? Absolutely. Can anybody pick up from me thus far, without going further on in the Sikha and cheating, of course, or if you did it already? For those who haven't, can anyone think of some nuanced differences that are apparent between these three sources that we read? What's that? He mentions people, correct, and he doesn't mention Gad and Shimon, right? Yep, that's one. That's one difference. Okay, well, we're going to see it inside. Of the differences between these sources. In the Tanchuma, the first source that we read, it says that they were punished together. That's what it says. Right? It says, I'm translating in English what we read. In south was Bishlam the Kahas family, near them was Reuben, Shimon, and Gad. Woe unto the Rasha, woe unto his neighbor. These three tribes who were neighbors of Kairach and his followers in the south were lost together with them in the rebellion. They had a tragedy happened to them. They got killed. Some of them got killed. So the Tanchuma focuses specifically on what? That they got punished together. Nen shuyachad, they got punished together. They got smitten. Well, then maybe, okay, I'm going to skip the parentheses. The Pirush Rashi Ma'aseh, the third source, which is Rashi, Rashi added, if you looked at the words, Rashi added the words, the following. In the end of Rashi, Rashi says, and they were drawn with them, with the kahas, with Kairach, into the rebellion, into the machlekes. And then he mentions that they were killed. So Rashi here mentions two things. The Tanchuma simply doesn't discuss the position of the neighboring tribes in this rebellion. He just says that when the punishment came, these neighbors got punished together. Rashi, however, points out two things. Number one, how Reuven got punished, right? Dasan Avim, etc. And before that, he mentions he actually prods that they were involved in the rebellion itself, not just in the punishment. Meaning to say that the Rasha Kairach drew his neighbor Reuven also to the actual act of sin. The third source, which was the second source that we read before, in the Medrash Rabbah, the Bamidbar Rabbah, Mosef Ogeser, it adds even more. Shayikulam Balei Machlekes, Avhimayu Balei Meru. Right? Let's go back to that source where we read the following, translated into English: the three tribes in the south who were the neighbors of rebels were destroyed with them. And in this it says, woe to the Rasha, woe unto the neighbor. They were neighbors of Kairach, and due to this closeness, Reuven, Shimon, and Gad were all rebels. So for anyone who didn't get it, I'm going to review it again. Okay? Each one of the three. The common denominator, all three sources are saying something very simple. Reuven, the neighboring tribes of Kairach, were affected by their neighbor Kairach in this rebellion, and many of them died. Now, the description of the effect is different in each one of these sources. And from Nakal Lakavi, from the most lenient to the most stringent, to the most severe effect. The most lenient the description of an effect is our first source of Tanchuma, who actually doesn't write there was an effect. He just says when the punishment came along, they were punished. Why? It doesn't say. We can assume they rebelled too, I guess, right? But it doesn't say why. It just says that they were affected by the punishment. The second in severity is Rashi, who says that they were drawn into the rebellion. But he doesn't go as far as to call them rebels. He just says they were drawn into the rebellion. They became accomplices, but they weren't ringleaders. And then the Medrash Rabbah says, Hayukulam Bale Machlekes. He puts them all in one pocket. Excuse me, I was just a conspirator. I wasn't the ringleader. You know, all the time in prosecution, the prosecutioners, what they try to do is when they catch one snitch, a rat, meaning someone who is willing to give in, then as long as the ringleader will be sacrificed, will be gotten, they're willing to let other people get a plea deal in order so the main conspirators have justice met to them. So to put everybody in the same bucket here, especially this is all Jewish history, we're going to see these people again. Say, you guys, Shevet Reuven, we learned about you in the beginning of Bamidbar. Kulam Bali Machlekes. You guys in Kairach, you're all in the same bucket. Or they say we followed Pirush, Medrash Tanchuma. We had nothing to do with it, we were just punished. Right? There's three different ways. And if you were part of Shevet Reuven, you would take this very personally, this. You would be a big Tanchuma fan, and you would have a lot of issues with the Medrash Rabbah. So it's not just a nuance. This is something that the sources are describing in completely different ways of what was the deal with Shevet Reuven.
So you could have said it just because of proximity. Then do you think just being next to them?
Everyone agrees that the proximity is what caused the effect. Everyone agrees to that. Everyone uses the terms Ayir Rosh Ayir Shtei. The question is, what effect was there? What was the quality of the effect? Was it just getting punished? Was it a little more that no, they became accomplices, or were they even ringleaders? That's really the question. And from the wording, it appears that each one of these sources is holding of a different position. We're continuing to the next point that the Rebbe, maybe I skipped the order here. We're in base. Okay? I think I skipped the order. In ice base, okay? I did the second point first. The first point. Gam yesh lahavan kama diyukim v'shinuyim b'lashon Rashi. Everyone see where I am? Okay. Also, we need to understand a few changes in the wording of Rashi. Number one, Aleph usmuchalem degel Ruben achanet teman v'lepitch degel zekludum damash v'tashim v'got v'tum Bamidbar. The Tanchum Bamidbar, they gave us all the information. They said, in the south, the neighbors of Kahas, the neighbors of Kairach, it's not just Reuven, there's three tribes, Reuven, Shimon, and Gad. Rashi, for some reason, gets them off the hook. Shimon and Gad are nowhere to be mentioned, and in fact, until we learn this medrash, we just learn Rashi al Torah, we wouldn't have a clue they had anything to do with this story. Why did Rashi go ahead and do this? Why did he omit this part of the medrash that discusses the effect on the other tribal neighbors? And the Rebbe adds, it's not just a fact Rashi decided to omit it. I don't need to. For what? I don't need to write to him. Rashi went out of his way in another area and wrote all three tribes, where the Hemshchim, in the continuation of the Parsha, it doesn't end with a discussion of woe unto the Russia, woe unto his neighbor. If you remember, in the continuation of the Parsha, Rashi then brings on the pasuk, Moshe, Aaron, Uvana, the Moshe, Aaron, and his children, as I said earlier, were in the east, right? The three families were south, west, and north, and Moshe and Aaron were in the east. And who was in front of them? Yehuda, Shevet Yehuda, right? And Yisachar and Zvulun. So Rashi says that because of that, let's read it inside. Works the other way as well. Just like we say woe unto the Russia, woe unto his neighbor, we say good unto the tzaddik and good unto his neighbor. Since they were neighbors of Moshe Rabbeinu who learned Torah, Nasu G'daylim B'Torah, they became G'daylim B'Torah. So here Rashi goes out of his way, mentions all three tribes who were there, but earlier, even though we have a medrash, two midrashim, the sources of Rashi, who also mention all three tribes, Rashi decides to omit two of them. So this begs the question, something's going on here. This isn't a coincidence for Rashi. And I'll point out here again, this is something that most people would run over. People wouldn't even pay attention to this nuance of an omission. But as we see, the Rebbe is going to glean from this such an amazing teaching of three completely different ways of understanding the psychology that affects our neighbors. Okay, so those are our two main questions in the Sikha. That it basically begs the introduction of the novelty of the Sikha to come up with the next part, which is the three different types of hashpahs and influences that neighbors have on us. So what the Rebbe is going to do right now is the following. He's going to explain that the relationship between yourself and a neighbor can have three different levels, three different qualities. And again, when I say neighbor, let's not think of it in the terms of the person living next door who I don't see anyways, or I don't even know who they are. Neighbors is anyone you're acquainted with, as we said before, even information-wise. Reading the news, turning on your phone and reading the news, or reading a story, or reading something from WhatsApp. All those are considered neighbors. They enter into our head information. So there's three different qualities. There's three different qualities of effect. And the Rebbe, after he explains the three different qualities of effect, he's then going to attach it to the three different pirushim and how each one is taking a different approach and the quality of effect that neighbors have. So let's begin. V'yesh levar when ois gimel, okay? Ois gimel. V'yesh levar za behektim. To explain this, we need to introduce the inyan pulas hashchenas hashpas adam hashchenim mitzimekam. Regarding the effect of a person on his friend, on his neighbor, we find three different ways. Number one, The effect of the neighbor is something completely external. Completely external. Hitzonius. Kagoin, for example, that the reward that a tzaddik gets is given also to his neighbors, given also to his friend. So too on the contrary, that the punishment given to the Rasha is also given to his neighbor. I'm going to explain this. So the first level, okay, I'm explaining now the first level. We're going to go back inside for the second level. Is that the neighbors affects the person's quality of life and living. Okay? The person's quality of life and living is being affected by his neighbor. It's important. No one's saying it's not important. Quality of life and living is very important, but it's external. It's external. It is possible for one to remain immune and protected from the bad habits and character traits of friends, neighbors, and community. He can't. This is in the first approach. He can prevent any of the bad traits from affecting him in his character or actions. However, being that he lives in that community and a neighbor of that person, and is a neighbor of that person, any punitive actions taken against those people will affect also him and his family. The mere fact that he is a neighbor makes him prone to side effects of any consequences of the neighbor's bad actions. First, we're going to give a few mashal, but first I want to finish what the Rebbe says about Miriam. We find this in Chazal, this concept of what we can coin right now, collective punishment, where you're not guilty of anything. You're just guilty by association. Right? We all know that in non-democratic countries, guilty upon association is a law, is a form of punitive punishment. Just to give an extreme example of current events, in North Korea, you're guilty due to association. If a person was found to be, rebelling or being a nuisance to the government, to the North Korean government, they turn their backs to the picture of the father of the dictator there. Then not only do they arrest him, they arrest his grandparents, his uncles, his aunts, his children, his brothers, his sisters, the whole extended family. They send about 500 people on a busload to one of their death camps. This is real stuff.
You don't have to go top youth. This one knows that one. He was in a wedding with him, and now he's in jail.
Okay, I wanted to give an example from the guy.
Okay, well, you can look at the Russians.
Yeah, the Russians. Now the Russians do it discreetly. That's the only thing that changed. Before they did it begully, now they do it quietly. Yes. So this is guilty upon association. So we find in Chazal this concept of guilty upon association. It's very undemocratic. It's not acceptable democratic to be guilty upon association. You're guilty if you did the crime. It doesn't matter if you're a father, a mother, a brother, or a sister. It doesn't matter who you are or a friend. But nonetheless, we find this in Chazal. The Gemara brings in the Masechah Sukkah 56b regarding the family of Miriam Bas Bilga. She was a Kehenis. Her name was Miriam Bas Bilga. Bilga was the Kohen family name of her family. It wasn't one family. It was a whole bunch of families called Bilga. And Miriam Bas Bilga, she, a Kehenis, ended up going, this is in the Roman era, okay, and when the Romans were pretty much already in charge of Jerusalem. The temple was not yet destroyed, but they already had taken charge of the area. And Miriam became a heretic, and she married a Roman aristocrat. And the Gemara right there says that she went and she hit the Mizbeach, and she said, Lukus, Lukus. She hit the Mizbeach a few times. And telling Hashem that if you don't listen to the Jewish people, why do you need to accept the Karbonos? And she spoke in a very heretical way. Now, Miriam's family belonged to the family of Kohanim who served in shifts in the temple. Every family had shifts. They would have weekly nishmaros, weekly shifts. After Miriam's abandonment of her faith and apostasy, the Chachamim find the entire family. The whole family was outed. No more Bilga family mishmaros. Out. Everyone. What did I do wrong? I'm just as much as Genser as all of you are. Not only do I have to suffer knowing I have a daughter that became a Meshugane that's doing this, now I have to be kicked out. What did I do wrong? I'm totally against this. The Chachamim made a Gzeira. They did it. They outed. They expelled the family from service in the home. Now this sounds very unfair. Where's justice? Where's democracy? Well, in truth, sometimes not doing anything wrong does not mean that one is clean of guilt or wrongdoing. The premises, the real premises of Torah of guilty upon association is not just something taken out of the box. Well, you're a relative, so you're gone. It's not automated. We don't find that Yeshua took the whole family of Achan and got rid of it. Even though in Yeshua it says that his wife and kids were killed, the Mefarshim explained they weren't killed. But certainly his brothers, his sisters, his father, Achan did something terrible. We don't find this concept guilty upon association everywhere. So it's not just picked out of a hat. There's got to be a reason why. And one of the reasons is because sometimes the family, the surrounding people, they fed or fueled the crime through interaction with the perpetrator, or they were complicit and did nothing to stop it. So because of this, the Chachamim felt if we see this came out of this family, the whole family is banned. I'll give a few examples of this type of external effect that one has on the neighbor that we're mentioning in this approach. Example number one, if one's neighbor has a bad habit of not throwing out the garbage and has a yard full of food scraps and other rubbish, it's going to attract cats, rodents, other insects into the home. Now, you can scream day and night and say, it's not my fault and I'm not the one leaving the trash there to attract the rodents and insects. Nonetheless, you are affected by it externally. You're not becoming a dirty person. You're not changing your habits now to have trash all over your home. But the smell and the rodents and the insects are being attracted to your area as well because of this thing. So that's one type of external effect. Another type of external effect is an area with high crime. When there's a curfew, you have to stay home. You're not a criminal. You're affected by the communal curfew that was placed. And so on and so forth. The point that we're trying to bring out from this first approach is that you remain who you are. You haven't changed at all. But there's an effect, there's a negative effect that's coming to you by no fault of your own, necessarily, but just guilty upon association. So we're going to first go through all three, and then in the Sikha, the Rebbe is going to connect it to the different midrash, the different tradition. We're back in our source. Days, yeah, everyone see where we are? We read Aleph already.
It's not so externally because there are feelings that are created.
Well, we have three. We have three approaches. We're saying there's three different levels and quality of effect that a neighbor, a friend, an influence can have on us. The first very basic one is just external. Base. Pe'ulas hashachin and pe'ulas pnimis. It's an internal effect, the second approach. Kleimer, meaning, shu meshane es oifen hanagase shel shchene vat shemeshane gam es mehusay. The neighbor, the friend, the influence, as we categorized earlier, including all the different types of influences there are, whether it's a physical person or it's a website or etc. All these influences, they're not just externally causing something to happen to the person who they're influencing, but it actually causes an inner change of the essence of the person. Until now, the person thought one way, the person did things one way, now the person became a totally different individual because of this influence. So first of all, what we're saying is already number one, that influences of friends, neighbors, and information have ability, information that we surround ourselves with, have ability to completely change who we are. It's quite scary when you think about it.
Not just what we do, but who we are.
Yes. Internal, pnimius, mahos. Now, obviously, in internal versus external, there's many levels, right? It doesn't mean that your entire essence changed essentially, but the point is that your emotions, your feelings, the way you act, that changes. I know this because, we all know this, but a good example that I know that you can see this in is when you have a teacher, okay, that you listen to a lot. You hear a lot of his classes. I give once a week, so it's not, no one has to get scared off. Okay, but you can listen to a teacher like every day. You begin talking like that. You begin molding your thought process very similar to them. Does anyone know what I'm talking about? Yeah. It's in psychology. They discuss the effect that kindergartens have on teachers. Kindergarten teachers, 100%. It's brought down by psychology. That's what you're saying, 100%. There's nothing new about it. It begins affecting the way you talk. You almost lose your adulthood. You go back. No one. No, we're not saying they're not intelligent. We're not saying that their intelligence gets demoted to a 3-year-old. God forbid. No one says that. That wasn't the intent of any of us. The point is that we're saying is the mentality, the way that they speak to people. There's a certain softness, a certain approach, and because that's what they're surrounded with. I'll give you another one. But they didn't. Okay, but they didn't. Do not accept testimonies from a psychiatric ward doctors in hospitals. They do not accept testimony. Let's say, for example, I'll give you an example. There's a woman whose husband, Rahman al-Islam, is in the psychiatric ward. He went in the shoulder. He went crazy. He's in the psychiatric ward. He's locked up in the hospital. Let's say they have in Jerusalem, they have Herzog, they have a few of them, fortunately. Okay? So the best that she wants to get freed, she wants to remarry, move on with life. It's a terrible thing. What, you're going to be stuck forever? So she wants to move on. Now, someone who's crazy can't give a get. Someone who's Meshuggah, he can't give a get. Now, even Meshuggah people, they're not Meshuggah all the time. Even people who are crazy, they have lapses of sanity. Okay. So, especially if it's okay. Anyways, so the point is that the way Bate didn't work is that they will not take testimony from the psychiatric ward doctors, because those doctors, if they've been there for a long time, they've been there so long, they don't anymore know what's crazy, what's normal.
Where does it say?
I'm just telling you what's done. No, it's not halach. I'm telling you what's done. What I know is done in Bate. They will have a separate external evaluation of the person from someone who doesn't work in the psychiatric ward.
Not just someone who's in that person's doctor.
No, we can, if the person is his doctor who comes once in a while to check him up. We're talking about people who intern in, they work in that hospital. That's where they're surrounded with their whole lives. I'm a Mashiach, I'm a Leo Navi, I'm this, I'm that. So when you're surrounded by all these people all day, it begins rubbing off.
I can relate to this.
This is the second approach. The second approach says, don't think you're going to go into an area of influence and you're going to stay benign. You're going to stay protected. Everything, I'm going to be fine. I'm made of stronger metal. I'm made of stronger protection. The second approach is, in the first approach, yes, it's just external. It's just, you have to deal with the crazy people. But yourself are not going to become crazy. You're going to have to deal with the mushagas. You're not going to become crazy. But the second approach is saying it's going to begin creeping in a little bit in you. You're also going to become a little bit mushagas.
Can I give a short example that's really good? This book I read about someone who's a deprogrammer in the days when they try to get kids out of cults. So this guy was like one of the most famous. His name was Ted Patrick. And he describes going into one of the cults. I can't remember which one it was. He said he was going to try to get somebody out. He was trying to get somebody out. And he said, if I would have stayed there another 12 hours, I would never come out myself.
Yeah, we can explain based on that a very interesting historical event that could have saved so much heartache that happened with the Alter Rebbe and the guy in Tovkuf Lamed Beis, 1772. The Alter Rebbe, the Nachmendel of Vitebsk, and Rabbi Kalisker went to Vilna, and they stayed there for the whole winter in order to meet with the Vilna Gaon. And the Vilna Gaon refused to meet with them. And they came and knocked on the Vilna Gaon's door a few times to meet. To the point was that literally the Vilna Gaon climbed out of his window and left the city, ran away from the city. And his own Bezdin told him, meet with them. We want you to meet with them. We want this to be worked out. We want this to be worked out. The Vilna Gaon refused. Now that's the story. That's the Chabad tradition of the story, and there's a Litvish tradition of the story. The Litvish tradition of the story is brought down by the Vilna Gaon's top student, Chaim Volozhiner, from his grandson of Chaim of Brisk, which was told over by his grandson, Yosher Ber Soloveitchik. The following: that the Vilna Gaon heard of the holiness of the Alter Rebbe, that he was afraid that by just seeing the Alter Rebbe's face, he would be completely transmitted, and there would be nothing to discuss anymore, nothing to oppose anymore. And according to Torah, you can't take bribes. It has to be based on facts on the table, not based on godly experiences. So that's the tradition. So the point is that yes, these things have an influence, and that's why, as Chassidim, the Chassidim would take people to the Rebbe, even if they didn't hold of the Rebbe of anything. For them, they were living in their darkness. For them, they didn't care. But just having the Rebbe look at them, just being near, can already have an effect of completely cleansing that person's soul. So this is the second level. I'll give. We have also here a few examples. 2 examples. One example is with smoking. One who does not smoke, but is surrounded by friends and family who smoke, may be influenced to do so as well, will naturally have a desire to experiment the cigarette, and from there, who knows to where things will carry. The American Lung Association attribute the vast majority of smokers started due to friends who smoke, peer pressure. That's how they begin, due to peer pressure. So that is quite an internal change. I mean, just look at the lungs of these people. That's a very pneumistic change, right, in the physical body. Another example is regarding tznius. When a person lives in a neighborhood that people dress immodestly, they do inappropriate things, they talk in a crude, disrespectful manner, you get influenced the same way. People may not notice that the way they talk and think is often affected by a friend or acquaintance who they spend time with. You begin thinking like them, you begin talking like them. And that's a subconscious effect that it has, even though I don't make a conscious decision. Wow, I really like how these people are speaking. Give another example. People who live in very black neighborhoods, now in New York, and they have a very specific way of dress, a specific way of talk. Everyone knows what I'm talking about if you know what I'm talking about. So a person who lives there, they begin picking it up. They begin talking in the same way. They don't consciously make that decision. It's just something that's automatic, that begins changing. In the words of the Rambam in his Mishnah Torah in Hilchos Deis writes the following: it is the nature of man to have his character and actions influenced by his friends, acquaintances, and people of his country. Therefore, says the Rambam, halacha l'maisa direct, it is imperative that when attached to tzaddikim and be in their surroundings, so you learn from their ways. If one is found in the area of Rishayim, he is to leave their vicinity and move elsewhere. So if a person's living, and that's why it's so important to live in a Makom Torah, to live in a place of Torah, unless one is sent on shlichus and one has the extension of his Rebbe to protect him and have him there, but otherwise to live in a place that's not a Makom Torah, it has an effect on a person, and there's no one way or another to argue on that. It has an effect on a person. The Rambam says that what happens if everyone's Rishayim? You have those people, the whole world's wrong. Everyone's wrong, everyone's doing wrong, everyone's doing sins. I'm the only pure person. So the Rambam says, if you really are convinced of that, go live in the desert. Go live in the desert. Go live by yourself alone as a nomad. And look in the Rambam says that's halach. If a person is honestly convinced that there's no Makom Torah, Sfas has these problems, Kiryat Sefer has those problems, Bnei Brak has those problems, Yerushalayim has those problems, New York, Crown Heights, Borough Park, Miami, and nothing's left. Go live in the middle of the Sinai. Get yourself a tent, and that's what the Rambam says. That's the halach. So if you're going to talk about that so much, you're getting yourself into trouble. So start speaking about the good side of things, so you can justify your stay. You can justify you being allowed to live here, that it's a good influence. The Rebbe once used this in a letter to an individual by the name of Amnon Bloy. He was the head of Naturi County. He founded Naturi County. A very fiery individual. who, as they say, ended up eating from the plate that he made. He ended up being put in chayrim by the Eidah Charetis. In any event, that's a story in and of itself. So this individual, Amram Bloy, he had a lot of good qualities, but he was very extreme. He held that, treif in Medina, the Medina's treif, the municipality's treif, everything's treif. Everyone in Israel's treif, and if any religious person votes, he's also treif. Everybody who's involved and associated with the Medina is treif, is puzzle, is a Russian. Therefore, you can't pay taxes and you shouldn't do this. So Rebbe told him, I don't understand. Rebbe wrote him a letter, I don't understand. Do you live in Jerusalem? He says, yeah, he lives in Jerusalem. How can you live in Jerusalem? You are supporting the Zionist government that you say is such a Russia. You're supporting them. So how am I supporting them? What am I doing? I don't vote. I speak against voting. I don't have anything to do with them. They're asking, do you pay your electric bill? Do you go shopping? There's taxes on that. So I wrote back to the Rebbe, what am I supposed to do? The Rebbe told him, Allah and the Rambam. Go live in the desert. Get yourself a tent, go backpacking, take your family, live in the desert. That's the halacha. If you believe that you're the only one in the world whose nose on the right derech, then you got to move. Did he move?
Yeah.
In the end, no, he didn't. Well, he ended up starting, as far as I know, a Tanishya in the Turi Karta Shul on a directive of the Rebbe. No, the Rebbe told him to do so. I think he actually did go ahead and listen. In the end, he ended up marrying a French Guiaris that was, I think, 40 or 50 years his junior. And that's when, this is in the 1970s, and that's when, it was just really interesting how this individual who was the most extreme of the extreme ended up put in chayrim by his own Eidah Charetis. And anyway, it was a whole story. And anyway, they felt it was kosher. There was nothing wrong with it, but they felt it wasn't, it's not my team. It was a 7-year-old man marrying a 30-year-old Guiaris from France. Anyways, getting back to our points. That I didn't hear. She's alive. She's alive and well. He passed away a few years after. She's not alive. She passed away? Okay. She was alive, but the last time I checked, I think she passed away. How long? Okay, the third level. So those were the first two levels. I think they're quite understood what we're getting at. So where's the room for a third level? What can be a third? The third level, the Rebbe says, let's go inside. Gimel, we're back in the Sikha. You see where we are? Gimel. Shchenes eina hasiba. You see where we are? Shchenes eina hasiba lezeh. Toiv l'tzadik, toiv l'shchena. Oy lahepech, oy l'rasha eila shchena. Elohu simen amusa shel hashach. That was something amazing. The concept of Oil Rasha Oil Shcheina is not like the first two interpretations or approaches, which is one is external effect, second internal effect. He changes you internally, even worse. There is no internal or external effect. It's not an effect. It's not causing anything bad to happen to you. But rather what it is, it's a mirror of who you are. Siman al mahuta shel hashachim. When you have a bad neighbor, when you have a bad influence, that bad influence is a signal, a sign, a mirror, a mirage of what you really are, of your essence. It's much deeper than the second approach. Second approach is saying you are who you are, and now you're getting the second nature attached to you due to the influence. So you used to speak like a normal American, and now you speak like someone from Brownsville because of the influence. You used to have good traits, speak nicely, and now you don't because you got affected by your surroundings. But essentially, sorry? We don't choose our
neighbors.
Okay, let's not focus on the literal term neighbors like someone living right next door to you. Neighbors is influences, a general term for influences, which I said could be a neighbor, could be a friend, could be an acquaintance, could be a business partner, could be an employee, an employer, a coworker. And I think, in my opinion today, our biggest neighbors are our internet influences. Okay, and social media, all of those are our biggest influences today. People don't talk to each other anymore. So there's no real influence of, I mean, not my generation. I don't know about what's still going on in the old generation. But in the new generation, it's, you're talking to someone, you try to talk to someone, he's on his phone answering someone else. So I got to write him on the phone so he talks to me. That's how it works today. Today, you can't have conversations with people because everyone's busy, so busy with their lives on social media. So those are our neighbors and influences, but it makes no difference because the influence is the same. The influence is the same. No, my point is that just like when someone's talking with you, you get influenced by what they're telling you. So when you're reading information or messaging, it's all different types of influences, and that's how we should be taking the sikha. We shouldn't take it literally. Well, I have great neighbors, so this whole sikha was irrelevant to me. That's a very, very misguided way of understanding the sikha. Which, by the way, I know a lot of people don't even know who their neighbors are. They never see them. They make sure not to go out of the building while they think their neighbor's outside. They don't know each other. They don't say hello. They don't know if they're good. They don't know if they're bad. They don't know what gender they are. They have no idea. So they need to watch. Okay. Divine providence, the fact that they were created to be next to each other, the fact that this article came to me, the fact that this individual was talking to me about this subject, the fact that this is my good friend, then their nature and their influence is a sign of what I am, of what my true dispositions are towards, my true instincts are towards. In other words, that the effect of the neighbor is not to externally affect you, and it's not to push onto you new personalities that you never had. All it is, it's an igniter to ignite your already dormant personality traits that you have, but were subconscious. Let's explain this in English. The third level is that a neighbor reveals subconscious traits. When one is influenced by a bad friend, neighbor, or neighborhood, it can be due to two factors. I'll mention something important once we mention neighborhood. Important to note that when we mention about influence, it's not just influence in terms of things that we read and things that we see and things that people we speak to, but there's also a subconscious, more encompassing influence just by the neighborhood itself. For example, somebody who's living in South Beach, okay? Then even if they never talk to anyone in South Beach and they wear Shmir Sinayim glasses so they don't see anything wrong ever, right? It's all blocked out. And so it's as if they're living in their own world. Just the fact that there's so much tumah going on in that vicinity, the spiritual klippas in the air that you can't escape from. There's nothing you can do about it. There's no protection against those klippas. Those klippas exist. Those klippas are created. And this is brought down to Chassidus. And we can have machshava zaros and foreign thoughts because we're in that area. So this is another important point of the types of influences that there could be. It's not literally only from somebody who we know and are friendly with, but it can just be from actually being in the area. You go on vacation to one of these areas. People like going on vacation to all these different places for some reason. A lot of people go to Thailand. The Mokim Tumah Vedazara and Gilead Rice is one of the top places in the world. You understand, it doesn't matter if you're going to keep kosher there and you're going to do everything. What are you doing? You're entering your whole body into shmutz. You're entering your whole mind into tumah, You're putting your whole atmosphere into an atmosphere of tumah. Where we are has an effect on us just by the air itself. Reb Marash once, in the middle of davening, went over to a chassid and he said, I can't daven with your machshava zaros. I can't daven with your machshava zaros. There's too many klippas in the air of machshava zaros. Stop. So that's the neighborhood effect. So this can be, let's continue to the third approach. It can be due to two factors, right? The influence of the bad friend can be due to two factors. One is that the person is genuinely a good person and simply became interested in the bad behavior after witnessing it being practiced by others, right? My kid, we know this all the time. My kid is such a good kid. He's such a special boy. He's such a special girl. She has bad friends and now she's doing bad things. So that's one way of looking at it. That's the second approach, right? She adapted bad behavior due to her friends. And the second is, and this is very hard for parents to come to terms with, which kind of ends up being a block to getting their child the real help that they need, that the person always contained within his character a leaning towards this bad behavior. It's not by coincidence that these are her or his friends, and she just innocently became contaminated by their negative attitude, by their bad behavior. There's a reason of why there's a connection. There's a leaning towards this bad behavior that causes this influence to be by you. And witnessing others do it brought out this bad behavior from its subconscious or controlled state to out in the open where it is now expressed in action. This is the third level of influence of friends, neighbors, and society, that if one's surroundings lack control in areas in which he already holds in a struggle in, it can reignite those struggles and call him to fall prey to his bad traits. We have here two examples that we can give, two mashal. One example is regarding addicts. Drug addicts, Rahman al-Islam, that Baruch Hashem have rehabilitated and gone through rehabilitation. They're off whatever they were on, and they're leading normal lives. The rehabilitation counselor is one of the primary things. And this is I'm just giving an example from drug rehabilitation. You can look it up. But this really applies to any addiction. Any addiction that we have. It doesn't matter what it is. Someone has an addiction, I don't know, to whatever it may be. One of the primary things is once the person has weaned off of his addiction is get rid of all associations with it. If you have a picture of the drug, don't have it. Don't look at it. Don't delete your friends. In the case of drugs, delete all the drug dealers, all your friends you used to do drugs with. Don't have them on your phone, because just seeing their names can already cause a relapse. Just looking at it can already cause a relapse. So you got to literally whitewash everything that has to do with the addiction in order not to have a relapse. Because if you see it, just viewing it, what is it doing? It's reigniting back to your weakness, to your own essential weakness. They're not influencing you. You didn't talk to them. It's just reigniting your weakness that you have. Another example that is a good example is regarding people who struggle with anger management. Anger management can be very well controlled with proper, right? We had our class on it, with the proper self-help and self-work. But most people who have a disposition towards uncontrollable anger, it's part of their nature, no matter how strong of a management course they take and they work on themselves, if they are placed in a situation where they are around very angry people, that can ignite them right away, like a fire. If a person has a wick with, something, a flammable item in his hands, if he guards it from ever coming near fire, it's never going to get ignited. But the second it touches a spark, boom. So the person with the anger management can learn to manage, can learn to guard his torch that's soaked in kerosene to never come near a spark. Once it does, this is because the person contains a subdued and normally controlled subconscious disposition towards anger. And the same thing is regarding what we're saying, all these traits that a person gets badly influenced in. The third approach is saying it's possible that it's not just something that was stuck onto him that got added to him a second nature, just revealed what his real disposition initially was, his intrinsic personality and instinct. The Rebbe now goes into a source in Chazal for all three of these approaches. Very interesting source. I'm going to say it outside because I see we're running out of time, and I want to get to the main punchlines of the Sifra. Dalet, okay? I'm saying Dalet outside. I'll say a little bit inside, just a little bit. One can say that the source of all these three different approaches of influence, of Eile Rasha, Eile Shcheinei, how it gets influenced by halacha, is found in halacha. The Dine Nigei Batu. So this I'm not going to read this out, I'll just explain. The Rebbe says that we find a source for this, three different approaches of influence, when it comes to tsaras of homes, right? There's different types of tsaras. of spiritual leprosy that used to exist in biblical times. And there's 3 different types of effects that we find that it can have in a home according to Allah. Let's say a person lives in an apartment, shares a wall with his neighbor. And lo and behold, one morning he wakes up, he sees a very strange color on his wall in biblical terms. He's learned Parsha Tazria, let's say. He begins to get a little worried. He said, I'll sleep it over the night. He wakes up the next morning, huge. He has a huge, growing, colorful spot on his wall. What do we do? So we know the way it works, right? He goes to the Kayan, they empty out the house. You have to move out your whole house. Can you imagine that? Move out your whole house. Live them in the streets. You leave everything in the streets and you bring it back. The Kayan comes in, goes through the whole process. Guys, I'm sorry to tell you, you're gonna have to knock down these bricks. All of a sudden, the neighbor comes running out, Mr. Cohen, it's my wall also. It's my wall. What, are you gonna knock down my wall? Sorry, there's nothing we can do. The stones must be extracted. These smitten stones must be extracted. Furthermore, the Mishnah says, not only must the stones that are sheared in the wall between the 2 neighbors, which now this neighbor will have a hole in his wall until it's fixed. Not only will he be affected by losing that stone, having a hole in his wall. Furthermore, the Mishnah says he has to help excavate the stone from the wall, because it's your wall too. So you have to share in the burden of the work. And there's 3 approaches. One approach is he simply has to help. He goes next door, he hands him over the chisel, does a little bit of work, an assistant. Second opinion, second approach. Not only does he have to, the first approach is, as I said before, he assists him, but they don't knock off the entire stone. So his wall will remain intact. Fixing what I said before. In the first approach, his side of the wall will remain intact, but he still has to go and help excavate the neighbor's side because it was a joint wall. The second approach is the whole stone's got to go, which will affect his side as well. And the third approach is the entire wall's got to go. Everything's got to go. So the Rebbe says these 3 approaches in halacha are corresponding to the 3 different approaches of Oila Rasha V'Oilish. According to the first approach, it's only external. His wall is safe. But it's a neighboring wall. You got to help him. So you get affected externally by the bottom line, by the punishment. The second approach says it already has an influence internally into you. It's an added nature, so therefore you're going to lose your side of the wall as well. And the third approach says it's revealing that also you're really not such a good person. Also, you have this disposition, therefore we've got to get rid of the entire wall of both sides. So those are the 3 approaches in halacha that the Rebbe brings for us that correspond to these 3. So with that said, let's now go to Eis Hey, and we're going to now read this in and how this connects to the 3 approaches of the Medrash, Rabba, the Tanchuma, and Rashi. I'm reading inside Eis Hey. Got it? I was just told we have to finish by 10. We have to finish by 10.
So you said 10:30? 10:30.
We can finish now and continue next week if that's what we're in a very suspenseful. We're at the end pretty much. Right?
It's the end.
It's towards the end, but hey, according to us, we can explain the 3 different approaches of the Medrash, the 2 Midrashim and Rashi, based on these 3 approaches of neighboring effects. The Tanchuma, which to remind everybody that the Tanchuma, when it described the effect, it simply said the neighbors affected, that Ruvain, Shimon, and Gad got punished together. They lost men. They lost, tragically, they lost people because of this machlekes. But the Tanchuma never writes that there was any internal influence. influence that Reuben and Gad shared in the machlekes and the rebellion. It's mainly regarding the punishment. That the punishment that the Rasha gets also goes to his neighbor. Therefore, the Tanchuma brings, the Tanchuma holds of the first approach, that neighboring effects is mainly external, and therefore you're just sharing collective punishment and not in the actual internal influence. Pirish Rashi, Rashi holds of the second approach, that it's not only regarding the punishment, it's not just external influence of the neighbor, it also affects the actual body, the actual essence of the neighbor. And this is why Rashi continues and writes, and they became drawn into the actual rebellion. I'm skipping the brackets. Avashitas Bamidbar. See? Avashitas on the bottom of the page. Avashitas Bamidbar. He was like the third approach. The Shchenas is a simin al mahusim shalosh. Remember what he said? The Medrash Rabbah says that they were all rebels. He put them all in the same pocket, the same category. They were all rebels. Kahas, right? Kairach, Shimon, Ruvain, Gad. They weren't just drawn into the machlekes. They were all rebels. In essence, they were all rebel rousers together. They were all ringleaders. It was not that they were drawn. They have a disposition towards machlekes. You have certain people, they have a disposition towards action of machlekes. It's a fact of the nature. They love it. They live off it. They strive off of it. It's unbelievable. Politics, the machlekes, if everything was just so simple, they would be bored otherwise. They love the fights. The neighbor just revealed and brought this out, extracted it from its concealed and subconscious and dormant state into its revealed state. Now, according to this third approach, it makes sense. The opposite, that when Rashi brings from the Medrash, the Medrash Rabbah, that the neighboring effect of Moshe and Aaron on Shevet Yehuda was that Yehuda, tribe of Yehuda, Yisachar and Zvulun were all B'dei Le'Torah. That's an internal effect, not just external. It's completely internal. And intent there is that they, in their essence, are really B'dei Torah, and the influence of Moshe and Aaron brought that out. Based on all this, the Rebbe now explains in Eisvav, why did Rashi exempt and omit Gad and Shimon? Why did he only bring Reuben? That's the one difference between him and both the Tanchuma and the Medrash. So let's see. Eisvav. Pia svara zu b'shitas Rashi muven atam Rashi kaiser rak debel Reuben lo yibigam Shimon. Kivin shel shitas Rashi oid Rosh v'edashchem u'metzar hashpas Rashi on hagas hashachim. Since Rashi holds nimshchu b'machlakusa, that the effect on Reuben was that the tribe of Reuben became involved and a co-conspirator in the rebellion itself, it's understood that not all tribes became affected in this equally. Meaning not all tribes joined the rebellion to the same quality. And therefore, a person, says the Rebbe, Rashi cannot write more than what we see from the Torah itself. The Torah itself describes how Shevet Ruvain was involved in the actual rebellion. But it doesn't say about Gad and Shimon. I understand it's brought in the Medrash, but Rashi is not a Medrash compilator. Rashi is explaining the simplistic understanding of Scripture without Midrashim. If he needs Midrashim to do it, he'll bring Midrashim. But he's not a compilator of Midrashim. That's not what he's coming to do, is give us information. He's coming to give us a smooth understanding of Scripture based on what Scripture says without anything else external. And therefore, from Scripture itself, we have no knowledge or reason to assume that God and Shimon were involved. And here we're saying they weren't just involved in the punishment, they were involved in the rebellion. We have no hint of that in Scripture. So therefore Rashi omits it. So Rashi doesn't say. In Ois Zayin, the Rebbe now asked the following question. We gave three approaches regarding the bad influence of neighboring influences. The Chuma holds one way, the Rashi holds another way, the Medrash Rabbah holds a third way. Why is it that everyone agrees that the neighboring of Moshe and Aaron to Yehuda had this good effect that they all became Torah scholars, Torah readers? What happened to all the three approaches? According to the Tanchuma, they shouldn't have become Torah scholars. They should maybe benefit from, I don't know, that they're very close to the Rav. They get to ask Shilas all the time. I don't know. They get their Shilas in. They get some kind of external benefit, but that they should become daily Torah just like Moshe. That's an internal effect. It sounds like by that everyone's going like the Medrash Rabbah. So the Rebbe says like this. V'yesh Leimer. We just skipped to the V'yesh Leimer. We're in Ois Zayin, second paragraph. V'yesh Leimer. Sheladas haTanchuma yesh chiluk ben shafet v'shafet. Can explain according to the Tanchuma and Rashi, there's a difference between the influence of good neighbors versus bad neighbors. Meaning good influences versus bad influences. The Shchenis L'Raz, bad influences, it's possible that it will only affect you externally, only regarding the Einish, collective punishment. Or at the very most, that you'll be drawn into this as well. And at the maximum, it'll change your essence, as the Medrash Rabbah writes. Masha'enkin b'shachin tov, whereby a good neighbor, Shemitah tov meruba, as the a good act is much greater than a bad act, meaning that whatever instinctive or consequative effect we find by evil is even greater on the good side, on the positive side by good. So a good neighbor affects the essence of the neighbor itself, that he changes to be good. And therefore the Tanchuma there had no problem saying that they actually became Gedolei Torah. So we see that by good influences, by surrounding ourselves with good influences, it's not just something external, it's something that actually eventually changes our mentality, changes the way we think, changes the way we are. I'll give an example. I think everyone in the world would probably agree that one should be a nice, kind, and polite person who knows how to compromise, listen to others. And I think everyone agrees that one should aspire to become this, acquire these traits. However, many people do not carry these traits, and they struggle with their ego when placed in a position that necessitates compromise or listening skills. If such a person is surrounded by examples of people who exemplify these character traits and sees firsthand how they live by them, and not only do these people become role models who one aspires to emulate, but their goodwill begins affecting one's own character for the better. In other words, that, as they say in Chinuch, the greatest effect one can have on his children is by being an example of what he is preaching. There's a very strong limit on words and information that we can use, that we can say to have an effect on people we know, especially children. It's more of an example of how we act. And that's why it's important to make case examples to children and to show them, this is how I act in this situation. This is what I did. To show them practicality. There's no greater, and this itself, when a person changes when a person acts in a positive way, it changes subconsciously that the people around them also begin acting in that. So instead of having, to have a sit-down conversation and a mussar shmooze of, counseling and therapy for the next, 10 weeks, just be a living example for the next 10 weeks of this positive behavior, and you see it's going to rub off. That's what the Rebbe's teaching us. You'll see it's going to rub off. Ches. Okay.
Shall we אני לא יודעת לומר בדיוק את הציטוט המדויק, אבל יש מורה שאומרת שחסד כלפי מישהו שהוא רע, יביא לתוצאה של דין. שאסור להתייחס לבן שהוא שלילי, שיש לי רוע וחסד ורחמים, כי זה יביא לדין. אז זה נוגד את מה שאתה.
Okay, the statement you said, I'll say in English, you said a statement that is a statement that says that somebody who's bad, it's forbidden to act kindly or merciful to him because that will bring the opposite. So,
That will bring what punishment to him?
yeah, punishment. So there's a lot of statements that are, first of all, there's a lot of statements out there that need their sources to be found. That's A. But B, even when we have statements that have sources, it's very easy to abuse the statement and take it out of context. Take it to areas that had no intent. Because face value, we can take such a statement and say, well, I judge Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, my friends, are all bad, and therefore I have a mitzvah to attack them and hate them and badmouth them and speak Lashon. I know a lot of people who do this. There's a lot of people who do this. One second. I'm just saying, there's a lot of statements that can be taken out of context, and the person can use that and say, well, so we are supposed to hate or dislike. Defining someone as evil is very subjective. Who gets to define who's evil? You? And you're not involved. You're not someone who's influenced. You're not someone who's bought off, who's bribed, or you're someone who's, an innocent outside bystander that's able to give a proper judgment. Who are we to judge what's an evil person? Okay, only the Torah judges. And we have in Perek Lamed Beis in time, the Alter Rebbe writes to us, show love even to the Russia. To the right stance. Show love even to the Russia. But kulei haivu ulai. What is written, that statement I haven't seen, but what is written is as follows. It's forbidden to be merciful to those who have no das, to those who don't have knowledge or no das, which that also can be taken out of context. The intent of that is don't give false mercy. If a child needs to be chastised for something wrong he's doing, then don't be a helicopter parent. Oh, my child's always innocent. My child's always good. You gotta give a spiritual patch. You gotta give the discipline. You gotta wear the strict hat for sometimes. Or, for example, if somebody, I'll give another example. Current events. You have a lot of families, not a lot, but for them it's a lot, the percentage, that they have been banned from schools because they do not vaccinate themselves. They don't vaccinate. So the schools ban them from attending schools. And they're very upset. And rightfully so, I agree with them. I would be very upset if my kids were banned from school. However, the sides who decided to ban them are correct because they don't want to have an influence of illness in their schools. And the parents and school body don't want to have an influence of illness in those who attend the school. So those who all want to follow the rules, they have no choice but to not allow them to come to school. So now, we could have a director of a school who's going to have mercy, very merciful. He heard the cries, the pain. He was not even intellectual. Forget about there's no intellectual debate who's right, who's wrong. He had 10 parents who, the kids, he heard about how the mom is going. She had to leave work. They're now falling parnasa. There's no money coming in. He had to leave work. She had to leave work. I'm telling you real stories going on in the whole United States right now, in different communities. This is real stuff. And they're going Meshuggah and Mamash, a director of a school can really, we're human, we have hearts. Our hearts can melt. But if he's going to now make a decision to take out the pen, no problem. Those who don't vaccinate can come back to school. He's being marachim to the achzari. He's being merciful to the crew. And he's not allowed to. That's where that statement comes from. If a terrorist who did terror, right? I have a conversation with him and I see, oh my gosh, he's mamash a human being. And that's what the defense attorneys always do. They humanize the terrorists. They humanize murderers. That's their job. That's their job for a living. is to recharacterize evil people. For me to be merciful for that person because I heard how hard of a family he had, how he was indoctrinated in the schools, that is called what you're saying right now. That's called that you're going to end up bringing, when you're merciful to the evil, you end up bringing punishment. But here we're not talking about being merciful and making a decision.
The punishment is
to everybody. If I let this guy out of jail, if I let these students that are not vaccinated to school, they're going to affect everyone in the whole school population. So I can't. That doesn't matter how much I feel bad. It doesn't matter how much rachamim I have. I'm not allowed to. And it's the same idea regarding the terrorists. It doesn't matter how much I have humanized this individual because I've spent time with him. And ask defense attorneys. They really begin to enjoy and like, not all of them, but a lot of them, especially the money, but that's another aspect, their clients. That was a joke. But they spend so much time with their clients, they begin to humanize their clients, even though they can be murderers and rapists and the worst people in the world, because they get to know them, become so close to them. So they want to now get an exoneration. You're going to get this person on the streets. This is the whole idea of leftism, the left philosophy, okay, versus the right. A lot of it is really turned into that, that the right is extreme, they're not merciful. No, the right is realistic. We're being realistic that it's as much mercy as I want to have towards the terrorists who need to have a death penalty, as much mercy as I want to have for the poor and me. And I have nothing to lose by showing love to this individual. For an example, I have no problem if the director of the school has no problem in sympathizing with those students who can't make it, with those students who aren't allowed in, with those parents who have to suffer with it. He sympathizes, he listens, he hears them, but no circumstances will he accept them in. That's called Yamin Mekarebes. Yamin Mekarebes, he's without the rights in Tanya. When the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, show love to the Rishonim, he doesn't mean go to the bars with them, enjoy life, do the sins with them. Of course not. What he's saying is that accept them as human beings, show love to them, be makar of them, but God forbid to be influenced and join them in their activities. The Rebbe here concludes in the Sikha, this is the end of the Sikha, in Sif Ches. And in general, by the way, just to mention that, as we know, one of the Rebbe's main philosophies of Chabad, is that we separate opinions from people. And therefore, we show love to everybody. And we accept everybody, and we try to really be incorporating of everybody. If each one of us really took this Rebbe's approach, our Rebbe's approach, of being a makar of every single Jew, not just a Jew who's not wearing a yarmulke and we're doing shluchas on him. Every single Jew, literally, every single Yid, and even Goyim, okay? There would be no machlekes because it would never be personal if someone did or said something or held of an opinion which I disliked. I don't agree with your opinion, and I will not. And as much as I sympathize with you, the decisions I make will be against your opinion. But I love you, and that's that's the way the Rebbe taught us. So in the end of the Sikha, the Rebbe says, Shaykh is a base on Elo Toiv Lo Tzadik Lo Toiv L'Shchein Elo Rosh L'Shchein Pasein who learned Mitzad Geder Inyan Ashchenas Gamatz Atich Minyan Amundum. Him Aderf not so the Patum Hamshach Matzah. The Rebbe says the connection in this week's Parsha between those two statements: woe unto the Rosh, woe unto his neighbor; good unto the Tzadik, good unto his neighbor. Right. The example of woe unto the Rosh, his neighbor, was regarding machlekes. Right. That's what causes that the neighbors. That was the case in our Parsha. And the second statement of good unto the Tzadik, good unto his neighbor, is in reference to learning Torah. Rebbe says they're connected. What's the connection? What's the connection? The connection is the way for a person to get himself out of machlekes, out of the oil and rasha category, by the Esek of Torah learning. Get your mind filled with Torah knowledge. Get your mind surrounded by Torah, by life, by good, by positivity. When a person does that, that's how he gets himself out of machlekes, out of disputes, out of problems. And on the contrary, in order for someone to become influenced by good, by the tzaddik, and become a god of Torah, he has to distance himself until the opposite extreme from machlekes. He cannot get involved in machlekes. This is also, one can say, the reason of why we read this Parsha before Shavuos, right? Next week is Shavuos, and Chutzlars, they're going to be reading it literally right before Shavuos. We have another Parsha this year in between, but nonetheless, we still read it before Shavuos. So Rebbe says the reason for this is because of the importance of Shalom, the importance of peace, and how that is a prerequisite for accepting Torah learning. The lessons of this Maimar. Let's closing up the Maimar. Let's do through some lessons of the Sikha. So there's a lot of lessons we can think about on our own, right? You all have permission to think about the Sikha and get your own lessons out of it. That's really everybody's job to do. But some of them that I can think of myself, and I'll be glad to hear if anyone else has anything else they want to say, is number one, people may notice that the way they talk and think is often affected by a friend or acquaintance who they spend time with. After some time, one can begin thinking and talking like them, having been affected on a subconscious level. This applies for the good and for the bad. It is thus imperative for our proper development of Torah, mitzvahs, and good character to be surrounded by people who are role models and people who have the good traits that we aspire to gain. It goes without saying that we must distance ourselves from people and surroundings who carry bad traits that we do not want to exemplify. So while, yes, based on this, one should not be acquainted with someone who has bad traits, he shouldn't ban them, he shouldn't not say good morning to them, but he shouldn't become buddy-buddy, because those bad traits can rub off. And on the contrary, one who knows someone who has good traits should try to become close to them, to try to learn from them, to try to be influenced by them. And the same thing applies regarding information. We should surround ourselves with positive information, with healthy information, with true information. We shouldn't survive, right now there's a huge battle going on in social media against fake news. And they didn't realize, it's unbelievable, they didn't realize how damaging fake news can be. How many people can die because of fake news. How countries can change their politics because of fake news. It all starts off of one guy who's either a little mashugana or just a joker. He likes making stuff up. And it begins to spread, and people begin reading, and people get influenced. When a person surrounds himself by false information, or bad information, or evil information, then they start becoming that bad and evil information themselves, unfortunately. So this is part of the filtering system we spoke about in the beginning. Each person contains various factors of expression, feeling, thought, speech, and action. And these faculties are neighbors of each other and affect each other, right? We spoke about earlier that neighbors is not just external, it's also in the mind. Our mind is a neighbor of our heart. So negative or improper speech affects one's thoughts, feelings, and eventual actions to act, think, and feel accordingly. For example, screaming and shouting ignites feelings of anger, which triggers thoughts of revenge and punishment, and leads to action of such nature. Likewise, bad and negative thoughts affect our emotions, which affect our speech, and eventually affect our actions. So one must view all these faculties as one unit and not allow evil and negativity to be expressed by any one of them, as one influences the other. The third lesson is what we just learned. Stay away from machlekes. Machlekes and being a Torah Jew cannot and do not coincide. Torah brings peace. We must work on attaining a character that brings peace unto others. Again, to finalize this point, not to make a mistake. Staying away from machlekes doesn't mean you never have a position and you never do anything about your position to do something about what needs to get done because you stay away from machlekes. I don't get involved. I don't buy dairy because there's an anti-dairy people. I don't buy meat because of the anti-meat people. I don't buy power because of the anti-dairy people, so I die. I don't eat anything. Right? That's obviously that's crazy. Okay? You have to take positions and you have to do research, take your positions, and if you have influence in your position, go 100% fast forward with those positions and try to get the whole world on board. Okay, however, don't disrespect people who think otherwise. Don't negate people who think otherwise. Don't discriminate against people who think otherwise. And if people do, you're going to stop them. You're going to put an end to it because you love every single person, you love every single Jew, and you don't get involved in machlekes. But you do get involved in opinions and pushing opinions. We do get involved in opinions and pushing opinions. We deserve to be opinionated, which means we deserve to have the right. Yes. Now, obviously, someone who doesn't have the expertise in a field, then he shouldn't be voicing an opinion in a field he doesn't have expertise. He should be voicing humility. So someone who's not a doctor shouldn't be voicing medical knowledge. He can say things here and there he's learned. He could say things here and there. Right? That's another point. But that's an important point. The person, part of not getting into machlekes is humility, right? Having humility about your knowledge, knowing I'm not a mechanic. I know I'm not a mechanic. So even if I read or saw something one time about how to fix a car, God forbid if anybody listened to my advice, who knows what would happen when they drove? The engine fell out of it. You have to go to an expert, and there's experts in every single field. There's no such thing as somebody reading a Wikipedia article and suddenly they become an expert. And this is something that we see today. It's unbelievable, the haughtiness and arrogance. Someone can read a Wikipedia article. He thinks now he's a greater expert than the experts in the field because he read an article, and now he has greater information. This false sense of arrogance causes tremendous machlekes. It usually comes together. People who do this are also the same type of people that have no tolerance for people who think otherwise.
But I wanted to ask you one thing. I don't always have an easy time making connections, but I keep thinking about the Baal Shem Tov, like what you see in another person.
Right.
How
Mirror.
does that fit in with this?
Well, that was the third approach. The third approach was that in essence, this neighbor, you're thinking, wow, this is a really bad friend. You should really be asking, why is he my friend? Let me go look in my mirror. Let me do a cheshbon nefesh.
And it's such a
Right. Yes, the whole idea. Yeah. Well, it's the general idea of, when somebody, I'll just give an example. We should really use all the time. Every interaction we have, technically, we should try to be deducing something from it. I use it a lot in halacha. When somebody asks me a shaila, even if it's a very stupid and simple question from my knowledgeable opinion, I always make sure to try to relook into, because I know the reason why God sent me this question. There must be something, and I usually always find something I missed. Usually always I find there's something that needs to be sharpened here that I missed. That's a humble way of taking things. I know you're giving an answer right away. The person's got to take God's way of sending messages. God doesn't wake up in the morning, call you on your phone and says, listen, this is God. You got to do A, B, and C today. He does it in a very subconscious way. He sends people, he sends occurrences. And a lot of times we run these things over. We don't pay attention to them. We don't think about them. But these are all messages for us to, to the best of our ability, get to the bottom of something that can be bettered at, that can be improved.
Thank you very much.